Welcome, everyone. My name is Caro de Posada, and you are invited to our Connect with Caro Expert series, where I bring experts on all things mindset, wellness, and relationships. Today, I have a very special guest to introduce to you, and this is not the first time that I introduce her to you. I actually talk about her all the time because this is my personal life coach, Susan Ford Collins. Susan is known, the way I was introduced to her is that she's known as the people whisperer. She has a way of connecting with people in a very, very deep and profound way, and helps them by coaching them through their life and to become the most successful version of themselves. And Susan has just released her latest book, which we are so excited about, Blur, Clear the Way Ahead, even in the worst of times. So let's welcome her. Hi, Susan.
Hello, my dear, and hello to everyone. A lot of you are familiar faces. Love to see you again.
I'm so happy to have you here, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you, and thanks to Dave for being my editor.
That's right.
It's been quite a journey. This is the book I didn't intend to write.
Well, let's start with that.
Okay.
Why didn't you intend to write it?
Because I had written 3 books about success, and I thought, okay, I'm done. And then Blur happened in my life. My husband got cancer, my sister got cancer, tornado and a hurricane hit my home, and then my daughter got a very serious skin cancer, and I was in Blur. I couldn't find my way out of the parking lot. I was afraid to go to the grocery store. And it got worse, of course, after that when COVID hit. And I realized that I had to go back to consciously using all 10 of these skills that I'd been teaching my whole life, and which I was at that moment telling myself I was too busy to use. Big mistake. So once I realized that I had to go back to the skills, I started putting things back together, and I thought, darn, this is another book. I don't want to write another book. Yes, this is another book. You have to wake up and write it. So with Dave's help, I have done exactly that, and I'm excited. Now I can see the perfection of it, but all I could see was the irritation of it at the time. It's like, I don't have time for this.
I know it. And you know, what I find most fascinating about that, Susan, and before I even talk about that, I just want to get the elephant out of the room.
Yeah.
If you guys hear a huge echo and you see my empty shelves, it is because I am moving into a new home as I remodel my home. If you follow me on my blog or on Instagram, you'll know that I'm on this journey, like decluttering and moving and all these other things. So if you hear an echo, it's because I am in a pretty much empty room, but for the last few things like my light and my camera so that I could interview Susan. but that's why there's echo. Anyway, now that I got that out of the way.
But you didn't say the trucks are coming tonight. She'll be in a different house. So yeah. I just want you to get the drama of this. This is a cliffhanger, so to speak.
Which is like the story of our lives.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
You know, it's funny because I'm feeling in a lot of ways right now, I'm in the midst of blur and clarity, which we'll get into. But what I'm most fascinated about your story, Susan, is I got to live through this experience. So I meet you in 2015 in a time of blur in my personal life. I mean, I was as blurred as I remember. My life was in shambles at that point with the death of my father and other circumstances in my life. And I came to you and you walked me through these steps. And then not so long after, right? Like maybe like
2
5
years
years later or 4 years later, you know, maybe less. I don't remember exactly the year.
2 years, 2017, it all started.
That's when, yeah, but I don't think it really took hold until maybe like 2018 or 9. Yeah. But all of a sudden there was a shift. And even though you were my coach, and even though you had helped me through this process, you were going into a process of your own. And for me, because you and I became such dear friends, as well as having a working relationship, we became such dear friends. I got to have a first seat in your life as you went into blur. And for me, the learning lesson there was you're never too old to get into blur, and you're never too perfect to get into blur, and you never have enough skills to get into blur. Like it can, you have this idea in your mind, like I'm going to go to coaching, or I'm going to develop these tools, or I'm going to take this course, or I'm going to accomplish this goal, or I'm going to lose this weight, or I'm going to finally get married. And then like in your mind, it's like the Disney version, life stops, like everything is happy ever after. That's it. But it's not. Like things are going to happen, and we're going to go in ebbs and flows, and there's going to be different seasons. And I got to witness firsthand how you went into that season and how you so gracefully kept yourself afloat and then eventually overcame it. And for me, that was a privilege.
And that's wonderful to hear, because inside it felt a lot shakier than that. So, but the wonderful thing is, in my professional area, I was steady as a rock the whole time. It was in everything else. As I said, it was in driving, it was in shopping, it was in just feeling alone and isolated, and not able to reach out to Albert because he was so ill. And I sometimes would make the mistake of asking him to acknowledge me, or to dream with me, or to help me. And he couldn't. And I was so hurt, and I was so disappointed. And I was so just not understanding the process,
So here's a question that I have. When did you realize, because like I said, this may have started in 2017, but I don't feel like you really hit the crux of it until later. When did you realize that you were in this state of blur, like you were in a moment where now you needed to start reintegrating these tools, or like something was really wrong?
Well, I think it's when I became a caretaker on a couple of fronts, with Albert, with my sister, with my daughter. My daughter was coming at night because she was in so much anxiety, and sleeping in the bed next to me for comfort. It's like it kept compounding. It wasn't any one thing. It was the one, and then the next, and then the next, and the next. And I was fine, as you said, until like 87, bowling balls came down the lane and knocked all my pens over.
And what did that look like? Because like you said, you stayed steady in your career, you stayed doing your work. So it's not like you hit rock bottom and you ended up hospital. Like there wasn't anything tragic that happened.
Well,
right? It wasn't like an incident.
I would say, I would go the other way. I would say this was the most tragic thing I'd ever experienced. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust my brain. I didn't have the confidence to take on the things that I would have easily taken on under normal circumstances. I just didn't feel like me. I didn't have confidence. And that's the only way I've gotten through life. Remember, I started my career by being laughed at the National Institutes of Mental Health, having this wonderful idea and saying to the group, I think we're on the wrong track. We should be studying successful people, not just ill and dysfunctional ones. And having a whole room of my peers and older laugh at me. And I took that moment, I took deep breaths, and I said, this is something important. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to believe them that this is a stupid idea. I think this is a brilliant idea, and I'm going to devote my life to it. So that I had spunk, I had all that. I had never felt this. I also grew up with a mother who was an alcoholic. So, all my life I'd had challenges, one after the other. This was different. This was coming from everywhere. And my usual comfort areas were not there. The people that I counted on to be my support system weren't there because they were ill.
Well, and hold on a second, because you're also divorced.
Yes.
Right? So you're divorced, you grew up with a mom who was an alcoholic. You've like you said, you've overcome a lot of challenges. And you felt that this was the most tragic time in your life?
This is the one that got to me the most. Yes. It wasn't tragic on the outside. It was tragic on the inside. It was a loss of myself. It was a lot. I had always trusted my brain. I'd always trusted my way to figure things out. I couldn't. In those days, I couldn't.
You know what is really interesting about what you're saying, and I think so many people may relate, is we usually think that the only time when we're justified to feel like we're in blur is when there is a tragic external circumstance, alcoholism, divorce, death, etc. And this wasn't your first rodeo. You've dealt with sick people before. You've dealt with abandonment before. You've dealt with tragedy before. What most people never feel justified in is feeling that they are in blur, even though things are not that bad. Like your life is not that tragic.
Yes,
but
and COVID did this to millions of us. I mean, our kids were home from school. We weren't used to that. Our jobs went away, our commissions, our salaries. We were afraid of each other. Our family gatherings, the hugs that we needed, all those things that were integral parts of who we are went away. They weren't available. They weren't accessible. And for a lot of people in the advanced career or the grandparenting or parents of older children, we weren't used to the technology to the level that it had to become, and a lot of adults were not prepared to help their kids do school online, and there they were, and they had their own jobs. It was just such an onslaught. I think it's the most difficult period that I ever remember in my life. I mean, and I lived through world wars, but this was the worst because it was so undermining, because we were afraid of each other. We were afraid to walk through each other's airstream out on the street. We were afraid to invite our friends over. It was undermining in ways that we had never experienced before. And thank heaven,
but
I had already gotten through Blur by this point. So let me just add that. But why I'm bringing it up is I saw so many people go into Blur at that point.
Yeah. But I still want to harp on this because I feel like you hit on something so important, which is even those things that you're describing in COVID are external circumstances and they're subjective, right? Like I didn't have that same experience in COVID that you had. I didn't suffer from the same isolation that you had. However, what I connected with is when you said you lost the trust in yourself, because I just had this aha moment in 2015 when I was feeling so much grief and so much. I can say it's because of my father's death and all these other circumstances, but in reality is because I had lost a connection with myself. There was a loss of trust, a loss of decisiveness, a loss of courage. There was something that happened to me where I just didn't, like you said, didn't feel like myself. And that can happen with big events, but it can also happen in the ordinary and in the mundane. It could happen in a 20-year marriage that has gone stale, but is not a divorce. It can happen in a career where you're unhappy, or in just, when you turn 40 and realize that your life isn't where you thought it was going to be. Like, I just feel like we can have those moments that could feel so tragic internally, even if the circumstances don't corroborate that. And I think everybody has permission to be able to acknowledge I'm in the time of blur, even if I don't think I'm justified to feel that way.
Well, and it creeps up on you. At least that's my experience in talking to people, is they could handle a certain amount. You can handle that your father had cancer and that you were going to the hospital, but what you hadn't had time to process is how life was different, how your father wasn't going to be there for you, how he wasn't going to be there for your kids. I mean, there are all these things that start to come upon us that throw us off balance. And yes, it could be something very simple. I mean, it could be having your house tented that threw you over the edge. You were close to, okay, and then boom, something flips you over. And it's this state, and I think you summarized it really well. It's loss of trust in yourself, loss of trust in your own brain, the inability to remember the simplest things, a fear of going someplace because following directions becomes really difficult, or finding your car in a parking garage, or, these things that are normally simple things that we expect to do become very difficult things to do when we're in blur.
So, okay. So it happened for you gradually. It happened to you in these little things. You lost trust of yourself. How did you begin the change, the process to get to clarity? Like, how did you work your way through that?
I'm a 4 a.m. person. I wake up at 4 a.m. and that's my clearest time in the day. And I started waking up in the morning going, what is it that I used to do that I'm not doing now? And I used to get up every morning with my planner and write down the successes from the day before and write down the successes I wanted to have that day and that week and that month. And I had stopped doing it because, quote, I was too busy. And I thought, all right, let me
Did you stop doing it? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you stop doing it before all these tragic events, or had you just stopped doing it because you had fallen out of the habit?
Well, it wasn't that I fell out of the habit, is I just kept saying I don't have time for it. And I didn't have time for it. It wasn't a lie. It's just I didn't realize how absolutely vital those steps were. I had forgotten. I've been helping everybody else. I've been teaching these skills in corporations, 4,000 training sessions around the world. But I had lost track of the fact that this was my bread and butter. This was the essence of my life and my stability. And as soon as I kept waking up day after day and going, what is it? What am I missing? What am I missing? And then I started putting the skills in place. I started with success filing, which is the process of every day saying, you know, what did I do today that was in the right direction? The little things, not the giant things, the little things. And like checking them off, writing them down, checking them off, and then writing what I wanted to accomplish the next day, and then checking it off the next day. That little simple process gave me a feeling of personal power again, because I had lost that. I felt like circumstances were running me and that I couldn't run the circumstances. And success filing was the process, and very consciously I was doing it, that like righted the ship. All of a sudden, I felt in charge of my life again. I felt in charge of my day. I counted doing the vacuuming, folding the clothes, the things that I hadn't been noticing, but nobody else was doing those things. And if I didn't do those things, my life became more and more chaotic. So I had to go back to what highly successful people had told me when I shadowed them so many years before, which it's the little things that matter. It's the little things that you have to string together to create the big things. And I was forgetting that. I was ignoring the little things.
Now, you talk about success being successes for purposes of success filing being 3 different things. Tell us what those are.
Okay, 3 parts. And I learned this. I shadowed highly successful people for 20 years. They couldn't tell me what they were doing, but I shadowed them. I stalked them with their permission and watched what they were doing. And this was the first thing I noticed that they did. They were spending time every day writing down their successes. And why they did that, they told me, is because if I don't acknowledge my successes, I can't do my plans and dreams. I can only do other people's if I need other people to acknowledge me. That was so earth-shaking for me. So the 3 parts that they told me about were success is completion. It's being able to complete the projects or the plans that we have in mind or that we've promised other people we would do. And completion, they said, isn't just doing it. It's acknowledging yourself for having done it, or acknowledging if you're someone who has employees or someone who helps you, acknowledging them. You know, they need that acknowledgement too. So it's that whole process of doing, finishing, and acknowledging that was so important. And when I put that back, all of a sudden I started to feel like, oh, I'm back. I can, you know, there's a lot of things that are off, but I can cope with this. So second, wait, let me get all 3.
Sorry.
So completion and success is also deletion. This was really important during this phase because they said it's not, you can't complete everything. So that you have to make choices. And there are some things that you have to decide, I am not doing that now. This is not my highest priority. I'm going to put this aside. Or we could be in a relationship which we've tried our hardest to do well in. It just doesn't work. And at some point you have to go, I'm not doing that anymore. I can't do it. It doesn't work for me. So in life, and this was something that I learned by watching them, they understood that deleting things was sometimes more important than completing things, because there's some things that just were not working. But there was a third part, and they said this was really important, and most people didn't realize it. It's also creating. It's making up stuff. It's coming up with the ideas like I did at NIH and spending my whole lifetime implementing them. It's coming up with new approaches to things. It's for us who cook at home, making up recipes, or simplifying food processes that we're doing. It's having better ideas and then sharing them with other people. It's really moving into leadership. So completion, deletion, letting go of things, and creation, using our brains to formulate new things. And I work with a lot of innovators, and I work with a lot of startup companies, and I love working with people who are like, they're out there on the edge. They're making the new real. And to me, that's just so exciting. I love it so much. And
I want to take you to the deletion, because I think this is a big one.
Yes,
and you wrote about this in the book, and I've been dying to ask you about it. So I love that I get to ask you in front
Don't die.
All right. So one of the things that you alluded to in the book was that you had to, in this era that you were in, with as becoming a caretaker and all these other things, and through COVID and all these other things, there was a lot of things that you couldn't do anymore. There was a lot of things that you had to delete, and your successes became more like, taking Albert to chemo, or, driving him around, or being a caretaker.
Okay, but right there, it's a really important point, because see, I didn't, at that stage of my process, I didn't see them as successes. I just saw them as, I've got to do this.
That's my question.
Yes, that's it. Until I shifted from, oh no, I've got to do this again, to this is my mission right now. This is the most valuable thing I can do right now, is to be supportive of Albert and, figure out other ways that he can get to his appointments and all of that, but to make sure that I'm supporting him, because, he was my husband. He was the person that I felt most responsible for in the world. And he was upside down. He couldn't help me. And this is something that most people don't realize. When you've got somebody close to you that's critically ill, all those roles that they play in your life go away. They don't drive. They don't go to the grocery store. They don't, they don't sit and watch TV with you and, sit with your legs crossed at night in a comfortable, all that stuff goes away. And that's really hard to confront. And it's really hard to create new ways to support yourself in that situation. And mine was complicated by the fact that I have a daughter who's a very important physician, but she's immune compromised. So if I wanted to go to her house during COVID, I had to isolate, because for her, COVID wasn't what it was for me, being sick for 3 weeks or whatever. For her, it could have been a life and death matter. So the isolation went on into COVID for me because of that.
But Susan, when you said at first you didn't see those as successes.
Yes.
Right. And you allude to deletion being success. But when the deletion is of something that you either considered to be a success, but you can't do anymore, or that you loved, how do you reframe from grieving the deletion to turning it into a success file? Meaning, sometimes you delete and that's a good thing, but sometimes the delete is involuntary and it doesn't feel very successful to not be able to do the things that made you feel successful before.
I totally agree. But once you understand that it's deleted, then the challenge becomes, how am I going to meet that need of mine in a new way, in a different way? So acknowledging that it's not there is the first step to being able to do something to replace it. So, okay, I couldn't turn to Albert for comfort or to watch TV or to do the fun things that we used to do. I had to reach out and find other ways to nurture those needs. Otherwise, I was in a sacrificial victim position, which I didn't want to be in. That's not a happy state to be in. So, the first thing is acknowledging that it's not there anymore. I mean, that was a hard fact for me to get. And I tell some stories in there. There's one about driving him in the rain one day when I was in overwhelm myself, and asking him what I had done for him lately that mattered to him, that he appreciated. And he said, can't think of anything. And I'm telling you, it's just like, boom. And that's when I realized how dependent I was on him to make me feel better. And he couldn't do the job, which was really freeing, because it said to me, whew, I better find some other ways to do this, because otherwise I am going to be one empty hull. And so those moments, and I share them as emotionally as I know how. The book is very emotional, because to really turn things around, you have to confront all of this head on. And it's tough.
I think you alluded to this in your first book, The Joy of Success, but it reminded me of it when you said it now about how you were with Albert, is most of us depend on that validation,
Yes.
first from our parents, which you talk about in The Joy of
Yes.
Success. And then we transpose that to our children, our husbands, our wives, our bosses.
Yeah.
Right. And then when they don't feed us that validation, or when they're mad at us, or when they're busy in their own lives, we feel empty.
Unless we success file. And that was the genius of learning this from highly successful people. Was they said to me, and I started to tell you this, that the only reason they were able to live full, rich, creative lives was because they depended on themselves for acknowledgement, or they depended on a little group of what they called co-dreamers, who were the people who understood their dream and who supported their dream, and on bad days who could actually say, hey, remember, you've done this and you've done that and you've done. They were the team that kept them afloat. And I had to build co-dreamers and collaborators and get involved in things, not the same old way because I couldn't, but in new ways. So I became a member on the board of a collaborative and of a group called the Strategic Forum. And I started coaching and helping other people. So even though it was mostly by Zoom because of COVID, I had that richness coming in because I recognized that if I didn't, I was going to be emptier and emptier and emptier. And that wasn't okay with me. I wasn't willing to be that. So again, it all goes back to NIH, to that moment standing up there and saying, hey, I've got to find out what these people are doing that the rest of us aren't doing. And I've got to teach people the skills. And so, 4 books later, that's what I've been doing my entire career. And I've done it all over the world, and my books have been translated into 14 languages. So, like your dad, I really feel like I've made a difference in people's lives as a result of all this. And that's part of the richness that pulled me through too. When you're a leader, the success of those who follow you are your successes too. I'm going to say that again because I didn't fully understand this earlier on. The successes of your children or your employees or your teammates are your successes too. And they fill you up just like your own successes do. Now, you can't have none of your own. You want that to be on top of the ones you're creating for yourself. But it's part of the richness of life. And I talk about the joy of success is the result of the things you do. But the fulfillment of leadership is the things that you accomplish through other people and supporting other people along the way. Much higher level than just personal satisfaction. Fulfillment is rich and cultural and global. It's very beautiful.
Yeah, I've experienced that with you because I always feel your fulfillment when I have a success to share.
It's better than mine.
Yeah, I always feel that, it's such a beautiful, it's such a beautiful thing. Now, you talked about having co-dreamers.
Yes.
And in the book, you talk about the difference between co-dreamers and co-operators and like understanding the difference. And I just feel like if you've never used this language before, if you are not in this world of talking about, creating your dreams and then creating co-dreamers, like you may be listening right now and have no idea what this is about. So like, can you give us an elementary explanation of like how you even get to the point where you can start thinking about co-dreamers. Like, what does that even mean, right?
Well, let's go to when the hurricane and the tornado hit my home, and I had to hire people to haul away trash, to repair the holes in my roof, to bulldoze the whole yard and dig up the pipes that had gotten broken. And so there were different levels of people. There were people who took the time to find out what my needs were and how I wanted it done, and what my time frame was, and who also had the skills to help me. And then there were people who just did what they were told, and they really didn't have the big picture. They required a lot of supervision. They were cooperators, but they were not co-dreamers. So left to their own devices, they would do their own thing, not my thing.
Mhm.
And so I had to learn to make that distinction. Otherwise, I was getting things that weren't in alignment, and I was paying for it, but I wasn't getting the result that I wanted. So understanding
what about
cooperating and who's co-dreaming, that's a beautiful distinction.
So what happens when you feel like you are everyone else's co-dreamer, but you don't have any co-dreamers of your own? How do you go about changing that dynamic so that you can have co-dreamers for yourself?
Well, first you've got to step back and go, what are my dreams? And not the dreams that your parents had for you. You talked about it before, but I want to emphasize it a little bit. As we grow up, we are rewarded for doing other people's dreams. When we get into the corporate world, we are paid for doing other people's dreams. So we're kind of taken off the path of self-actualization all along the way. And there's a point where we have to get back to what is my dream. Maybe nobody else agrees. I was lucky it was in NIH when I got laughed at. In that moment, I had to make a choice. Was I going to do whatever they thought was right, or was I going to do what my heart said was right? And so you have to actively dream, and especially in periods of blur, it's really important to, as I did, get in the bed and wake up, or do it at night if you're a night person, and say, what is it that I want? What matters to me right now under this set of circumstances? What would be success this week? What steps can I take? Who do I need to help me? They sound like little things, but they're big things when you're in blur. And the wonderful thing is when you accomplish them, they lift you. And they give you that sense of, I still do have power. No matter what's going on, I still do have power. And that's essential, because in blur, it tends to make us feel powerless. And like we don't have any dreams. All we have is disappointments, or the same old thing over and over and over. But it's not true. It's just something we tell ourselves, given the history we've lived with all our lives of trying to please parents, trying to please teachers, bosses, and all of that. There comes a moment, and blur is a moment that, highlights this, where we have to start pleasing ourselves and pleasing our dreams. And it's hard. I didn't say it was an easy thing. I said it was an essential thing. It's something that we must do to get our sense of self back. And, I raised two daughters as a single mom. I didn't feel for years that I really had a lot of room to just focus on me. I had to be focused on them. But I was able to continue my work and continue my research and shadow people. I'm a determined sort of person. I think you get that. So, once I set a goal, I'm pretty determined about it. But I'm also a very generous person. So it's not that I take it from anybody else. I feel like I give a lot, but the universe works. If you give a lot, you get a lot. It does go around, as my mother used to say.
Yeah. I'm thinking about what you're saying of creating your dreams and like defining what you want and finding that self-identity. And I'm experiencing that, which I've shared with you,
Yes.
on a different scale, right? In a decluttering world, like right now, like I explained, my shelves are empty. I'm going through this decluttering experience. And I shared this with you the last time that we met. I sat with my clothes. I had all this clothes, and I was sitting with my clothes. And according to Marie Kondo, the way that you declutter is you hold a piece of clothing in your hands, you look at it, and you say, does this spark joy? And if it does, you keep it. And if it does not, you release it out into the universe so that someone else may wear it, or so that it goes into the trash if it's broken, or its life is over. And I sat with every piece of item, and I would look at it and I would feel it and I would touch it. And no matter how long I spent with this item, I had no idea if it sparked joy in my life at all. Like, I was like, does this spark joy? I found myself wanting to put it on, take a picture of it, and text it to my girlfriends and say, should this spark joy? That's what I wanted to do, because I felt so.
But that's our history. That's the way we've been raised. That's the way the society has set us up, is to please other people. So there comes a moment at this stage of life where we go, well, what does pleasing me mean?
Yes. And
joy in my clothes, joy in my home, joy with my friends. What is that? I mean, that's why the first book was The Joy of Success. What is that? What goes from, just satisfaction to joy?
Mm-hmm. Well, it took me a long time. And I sat there and I looked at it until finally I started to redefine joy. So clothes doesn't give me butterflies, and clothes doesn't have the same effect on me as riding a roller coaster or doing a puzzle or watching a sunrise or a sunset. However, there are clothes that I feel comfortable in. There are clothes that I feel beautiful in. There are clothes that I like the material. And I had to start redefining what those things look like and say, I like this, or I tend to find that I'm more inclined to keep these and keep the others. So I felt that I was going from blur to clarity in that moment by really taking a deep look at myself.
Well, and this move is going to do that, because you're going to trim down. You don't want to move everything you have. There are choices that you'll be making. And, cleaning out your kitchen can be the same thing. It's like, gee, I haven't used this piece of equipment in 4 years. Do I really want to keep it? Sometimes we just have a lot of stuff, but it isn't current stuff and isn't stuff we want. And same thing with our habits and a lot of our actions. So it's about choosing and re-choosing and bringing it up to consciousness. It's easy to just be compliant. It really is. Just go along for the ride, but it's not satisfying. It is not joyful. I mean, to rise to the level of joy, you got to make a lot of choices and commit. Really commit.
Susan, you talked about success filing as being that pivotal skill that you needed to readopt in your life to start coming out of blur. What other skills did you implement to continue that process, right? It wasn't just success filing, there was more.
That's the first of the 10 success skills. The second of the success skills is called shifting gears. What we realize is that when you're learning something brand new, you're in the first gear. You've got to find the rules, the basics, the rights, the wrongs, how to do it safely, keywords, right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't, have to, pause. The rules, the side rails of the road that we have to stay within. And when we're doing something new, especially as we go along later in life, we don't want to go back into first gear. We don't want to learn the rules. We have resistance to do it, but yet you must, in order to develop some kind of proficiency in that particular area. So first gear is getting the basics and learning to do it safely and correctly. The second gear we shift up when we've got that. And now we've got to do more, better, faster, more competitively. Think about the marketplace, more competitively, more productively, eliminating steps that we always did when we were in first gear, those basic beginner steps, but starting to find out which ones we can get rid of and trimming it down. So second gear is about productivity and competition and production globally today. I mean, look at our marketplace. But then there comes a moment where there isn't any more, any better, any faster, any cheaper that we do things, and we've got to break through into creativity. So the third gear of success is creativity. Now, here's the rub, that if you're somebody who has a creative idea, like I did at NIH, your leaders can tell you, oh, that's stupid. Or your boss can say, we're not doing that. Or, so it's really important when you have a creative idea to make sure that you find a place where it'll get nurtured, or that you become the place that nurtures that thing, because it's like a little plant. You can't put it out in the scorching sun and the driving rain. You've got to create a safe space for it. And this is where co-dreamers come in, that if you find a couple of people who can hold this dream, this vision with you, they can help to nurture it, like a little greenhouse. They can keep you from giving up. So my love of working with startups and inventors and creators is that I become like that little incubator for these people. I'm the one who believes with them with all my might and helps them to stay on course and to keep going. And I guess that comes from what happened to me at an age. But it's a real pleasure.
But how did that affect you when you were going through the cancers with Albert and your daughter and your sister and how did that gear shifting work in that?
Well, I had to make sure that I handled the first gear needs. I had food in the house. I had gas in the car. I got Albert to his appointments. We got reports in a timely way. I had to handle all that basic stuff. But then, because he wasn't working and he wasn't really functioning, I had to handle the money too. So I had first gear and second gear, where he used to always contribute, generously as part of our partnership. So the third gear, though, was I still had to keep dreaming. I had to continue to believe that there was a future ahead that I wanted to participate in. And that might have meant inviting people over occasionally to have a nice lunch, which I love to do, planting a vegetable garden, things that I did have control over under those circumstances. So I could go into third gear, even though it was different. Maybe it was smaller, but it still gave me that spark of creativity, that spark of innovation that we all need. We need to know we've made a difference. We've brought something new in.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you've all of a sudden, your whole life has changed, your routines have changed, your habits have changed, your possibilities have changed. So you start acknowledging the successes that you have, reframing the deletions and turning and finding ways to replace those deletions with successes. And then you've saved some space to have hope and dreams of things that you would enjoy that are beyond the nature of the crisis you're in.
Well, and that third creative phase may not happen immediately. I mean, I wasn't sitting around dreaming in the thick of it. When we had the bulldozers here and they were digging up the yard and there were 11 palm trees piercing through the roof. There wasn't, I wasn't doing that part. But when I did get a breath and things started to come together, then I realized this is something that I need to do. And so I did plant a beautiful garden with lovely pathways, and I found terrific plants, and like some kittens wandered into my yard and I got to nurture them. And that was a pleasure for me. I found beautiful things in the garage once I was cleaning up. Cleaning up's a wonderful thing. You find stuff you have that you don't even remember you had. And I started making beautiful rooms and spaces. I could do that. It didn't cost me any money. It was stuff I already had. It allowed my creativity to flow, and it made me feel like that personal power thing that I'm talking about that sometimes we lose.
So I guess in the thick of it, you gave yourself permission to be in the thick of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to realize, hey, right now I just got to handle the basics.
Got it.
For a long time, it was just about bulldozing this stuff out of the yard and having it hauled away. And that took months. I mean, when they said to me it was going to cost, I had to front $30,000 to have the trash hauled off of my roof and off of my yard. It was like completely overwhelming, but I had to trust that at some point insurance would pay me back at some point a year later. But I mean, there were a lot of moments that were really tough in that process. Or, with Albert's process, he had 33 rounds of chemo and a clinical trial. Each time we get our faith built up, our hope built up. And unfortunately, his cancer, we were not advanced enough at that time to understand the dynamics of what was going on with him. And he did not survive it, despite all our best efforts and all the best doctors that we could find. Things don't always turn out the way we expect. The question is, can we take the ashes of what we have and, like a phoenix, turn it into something new and alive and meaningful? And that's the challenge. And I was able to do that. And I am able to help other people go through that recreation process. We look at the word recreation, but we forget that it's recreation. That's what it means. Maybe recreation for me is taking long walks or taking pictures of butterflies at Fairchild Garden and contributing my photography to their magazine. It's like, what recreates you? I'm sure it'll be very different than what recreates me. But
that's beautiful.
We each have to figure out, what is it? What is it? Does making a beautiful meal for somebody recreate you? It does that for me. I have people over here for lunch. I love fussing over the lunch and surprising them with something. Why? Because it makes me feel that I'm being taken care of too. The world is very reciprocal. What you give is what you get. It's, that whole cycle that we go through.
When you were talking about it, it brought up a point that you also talk about in the book. And this is post the event or the event or the events or the season of your life that got you into Blur in the first place. You talk about getting out of Blur isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering.
Yes.
And I'm hearing you as you're talking about like those bulldozing moments and how you weren't dreaming at that point, and you did start success filing and all these sorts of things. But I'd like you to go into that point of when it's time to look backward so that you can move forward. How did you get into that phase, or how did you figure that out?
Well, we want to forget the bad times, but as human beings, we are constructed to remember the bad times. To remember, like, how to avoid the lions and the tigers and not to fall off the cliff. Our brain and our body are set up to remember things that could be catastrophic for us. So the idea of forgetting bad times is really impossible. It just doesn't work that way. But what we can do is to go back and remember, using other people who are around us, like my daughters or the nurses or people around when I really couldn't remember things, to say, what do you remember about that day? Give me the more up-to-date, accurate information so I can put that memory together in a useful way, not the terrifying memory that I have, not the one that shakes my body, but the one that's understood and makes sense. So it's unrealistic and impractical to try to forget, but I lay out step by step how to remember without going back into the pain. Because people are afraid to remember because they're afraid they're going to be overwhelmed by the pain. But here's the trap. You will be overwhelmed by the pain if you don't update those memories, because those raw memories will be in there and they'll get triggered by somebody or something or a movie or a similar circumstance. So it's up to each of us to remember and update the memories so that they're accurate, so that they're healed, so that they make sense, and so that they're useful as we move forward. So
what do you mean by update the memory? What does that mean?
That means, well, for example, one of the worst days when I realized that the way I remembered the story, Albert had died at Baptist Hospital, but that wasn't the truth. My memory was completely distorted. He died at Mount Sinai Hospital. And I was like standing there sobbing. It's like, how can my brain be so messed up that I didn't even remember what hospital he died in? Well, because our memories lie. So I had to go back and I had to take my notes. I keep notes every day of my life because I think it's important to be able to recreate your days. I talked to my daughters, the doctors, the nurses. I went through everything so I could reconstruct that memory accurately and make sense of it. And then I wasn't so afraid of it. I didn't have to, like, have a shocking response to it. It was like, oh, okay, I remember that. Oh, I remember the process. So,
but I don't understand, what difference does it make if he died at Baptist or Mount Sinai for purposes of your pain or purposes of your moving forward?
But that wasn't the purpose. The reason that was important was it showed me how distorted my memory was.
Oh.
You see, so remember I told you that the real pain was not thinking that I had control of my brain or my thought or my memory. So it became very important. And it's not just for me. I've done this with hundreds of people, to go back and construct those memories so they make sense. And we put in the pieces that somehow we've overlooked. And we use other people's memories to be able to say, oh, no, it wasn't at that hospital. When my daughter told me that, that was like shocking. And then she said, don't you remember this? And don't you remember that? And then, I went over my notes and it's like, oh my heavens. And it took me a week to get that to settle back in my brain. But it was really a very important moment in the healing process because it started making things make sense.
I always thought updating was more about, if you, like, I remember a story you put in The Joy of Success where there was a woman who had been abused by her stepfather or men, and that she updated the response, like how her mother should have responded, or like she updated the memory to get herself. But I have a hard time understanding what that meant. Could you explain it in that context?
Well, we have control over our memories. I guess that's the bottom line, is that we can change our memories. And this was particularly important because my memories were distorted. They were inaccurate. They were grossly inaccurate. And it highlighted the fact that we are in charge of keeping our memories up to date. We are. Now, we do that usually by having pictures around and slides, and we tell family stories and all of that. But sometimes we tell the old stories the wrong way. And we have to challenge our memories and say, did it really happen that way? We can update by saying there were other people who could have helped, or the parents should have done things differently. We can look at it from a more adult point of view, or we can just take the information that we have available and make it make sense in a more full way, in a more conscious way. So updating is any time that we take a memory, we examine it and we enhance it, we clarify it, we bring it up to date, we make it make sense with all the information. And unfortunately, when we're in trauma, we tend to see things in glimpses. I have a client who was kidnapped on a plane that was hijacked. And he couldn't see it for years and years. That, it was just little flashes. And it's taken him practically his whole adult life to start to piece it together. And then it calmed down, like the energy of it settled down. So
what I'm hearing is by updating the memory or filling in the gaps, that memory stops having so much power over you.
Yes, so much crazy making power. Yes.
Because it's not confusing. I think maybe that's it, the confusion of the memory is maybe what keeps you engaging in it. Is that what it is?
Yes, I think so. Or the feeling like it's quicksand and that you're going to fall back into it. So yes, it's clarifying the memory. I feel like we're responsible for making sense of our history. I every year will go back, and I'm looking over this way because up on the shelf, I have a book that I've divided into every year of my life. And I've tried to remember what happened when I was 3 years old, when I was 8 years old. What school did I go to? What were the major events, illnesses? Who did I live near? Who were my family's friends? Trying to piece it all together like a movie so that our life makes sense. And so that we have the wealth of our memories, of rich memories, rather than scattered, scary shards of memories that we can't put together and make sense out of.
You know, this reminds me of Betsy, our mutual love,
Yes.
Betsy.
Yes.
Betsy lost her daughter to a drowning accident. And at some point, she made the decision that she was going to write this book called From Hurt to Hope. And as we were writing the book, I helped her edit, you helped her edit. As we were all engaging in the book, one of the issues that Betsy was having was having to go back into those memories to write that book was a very painful process. Certainly things that she did not want to relive. She never wanted to re-experience that. And it took everything within her to be able to and you talk about being in gear or out of gear, but for purpose of Betsy's book, she had to go back to that pain because she had to overcome it and update it so that she could write effectively and really create a powerful book, which she did. And it was a very difficult thing for her. But now, as you explained the updating, one thing I did notice about her experience was that once that book was written and she had revisited all those memories, had gone through that pain, her and I sat in moments and like went in excruciating detail, cried together. I know she did that with you as well. And as we went through that experience, on the other side of the book, she's a different human today. She is so much more resilient, so much more powerful, so much more able to talk about that pain from a different perspective. Now,
well, let me just mention in gear and out of gear, because there's two ways that you can remember. You can remember being in it and feeling all the feelings and sobbing and crying and doing all of that. And that's in gear. That's you're in the feelings. But you can always remember out of gear too, like in a movie where it's up on the screen and other actors and actresses are taking part in it. You can start by doing it out of gear and looking at it from a distance. You don't have to throw yourself into the depth of the emotion.
But how do you control that?
Oh, it's, I explain that in great detail, I think best in The Joy of Success. But, I even get people sometimes to tell me this story speaking in the third person. What happened to her, not I. I looked down and I saw, instead of she looked down and she saw. Very different emotional states, so that we can approach the memories from outside them until we get clear and we see all the pieces and how they fit together. And then when we're ready, we can step into them and allow the emotion to be there. But we don't have to dive into the emotion right off the bat. And it's important to know, start off from a distance, looking at the memory and assembling the pieces. And then when you feel like you've got a grip on it, then you can go back in and test out the emotions. Mm-hmm. But, I make a big distinction between doing it in gear and out of gear, because you can overwhelm yourself. You can send yourself back into the trauma, and that's not necessary. But, there will be some moments where you will touch the trauma, but that's life. That's the healing that has to occur. But you don't have to dive in. You can watch it from a distance. And I think this is one of the reasons that people love sad movies, is it helps them get in touch with some of their emotions and live vicariously from a distance, from sitting in the seat in the theater, instead of being the players up on the stage. So there are a lot of techniques about memories that, have become very important in the work that I did all these years.
So that I teach core, and the C in core is clarity.
Yes.
So I love that of course, you wrote a book called Getting to Clarity. So my last question before we wrap up, because it's time to go, is how did you know you were out of blur? How did you know you were in clarity?
I was clear. I mean, things started to clear up. It was like I could see better, like somebody had adjusted my glasses. Like my emotions felt like my emotions again. I felt steady on my feet. I felt like I could, drive someplace and be comfortable if something changed or there was traffic or, it just all started to settle back into place. And it was a long process. It didn't happen instantly because there was so much trauma from so many different angles, but the clarity was beautiful. It was the light coming up. It was oh, I see. Oh, I get it. Oh, I understand, or I can handle that. Or, it was beautiful. I loved it. It was daybreak. It was, it was a lovely sky. It was beautiful emotions and experiences and feeling alive, really feeling alive again and excited about things again. And that's what clarity does for us. It, brightens things up, makes it all work again. I wanted to also tell you that in the show notes, I am offering all of you for free a series of stories, little short stories that are kind of capsules of important parts of these 10 skills. And
yes, let's put those in the chat.
They're so emotional. They're so beautiful, but positive emotional, not negative emotional, positive emotional. But they're like little gems. They're ones you could listen to in your car. You can give to other people. Your kids would enjoy them too. But they're some of my very favorite stories that I've ever written over the years as an audio clip, just 2 or 3 minutes. And so I wanted to make that as a gift to anybody who's wanting to have it. So
I love it. So we're going to put that link in the chat. April, if you could do that for us. And for those of you that have not read the book, you can find Blur I love this. It's an Audible. You guys, you can listen to this woman's wise, steady voice speaking to you in the car as you read this amazing book and learn all these skills about, finding success, creating leadership, co-dreaming, getting in and out of gear, updating your memories, really getting through the blur and getting to the other side so that you have that clear joy that Susan has today. Like I can feel your energy and your heart and your love.
Back. The hard work is worth it because it all comes back.
Yes, yes. So please purchase her book. If you want to get a hold of her, you can also find her on Instagram and LinkedIn, if I'm not mistaken, as Susan Ford Collins.
Facebook, Instagram.
Yes, the link is in the chat, so you guys can click on that link and sign up for her snippets and purchase her book. And thank you, Susan. Thank you for sharing time with us and your wisdom and your gifts. It's been a wonderful conversation.
I can tell you're a lawyer. You can really ask questions, girlfriend.
Are you success filing with me?
Yes.
I love it. I love it. Well, it's so cool to have you on Zoom because I meet with Susan all the time and I come to that house and I sit right across that desk that she's sitting at now. And I eat her wonderful meals and we have conversations like this and it is soul filling. And for me, it's just such a privilege to be able to share you with other people and spread your light and your wisdom and give those gifts to other people. So
thank you. It was a joy.
All right, everybody, have a beautiful afternoon and we'll see you we'll see you as you move past blur to clarity. Yes. Keep in touch.
Have a good move.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.